G'day mates, it's B-Buster here, and I would like to give Raycon a huge shout out for sponsoring this episode. So with Christmas around the corner, it's that time of the year where, if you're like me, you're left scratching your head wondering what to get your loved ones and friends. But today, not only can you save time, but you can also save dollars on a gift that they will love and use every day. Raycon wireless earbuds. I've been using Raycon wireless earbuds for a while now, almost a year I think, and man am I so glad that I made the swap. Being someone who is involved in sound editing and things like that, I know a good pair of earbuds when I find them, and Raycons are legitimately the best that I have ever come across. The sound is really crisp, their performance is top notch, and when I listen to my audiobooks or go to the gym, they're so comfortable that I often even forget that I have them in my ears. And the new everyday earbuds look, feel, and sound better than ever. With seamless Bluetooth pairing and a comfortable noise-isolating fit, you can start listening right away and keep listening for hours. The audio quality is amazing, comparable to what you get from other premium brands, except Raycon starts at half the price. You get 3 new sound profiles to make sure everything you're listening to sounds its best, with just the right amount of bass. For instance, there's Pure Mode, which is for podcast listening, blues, instrumentals, etc. There's the Balance Mode, which is for podcast listening, rock, heavy metal, stuff like that. And then there's the Bass Mode, which is for hip-hop, EDM, reggae, etc. Raycons offer a juicy 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life. There's even a built-in mic, and you can take calls on your earbuds at the press of a button. So, this holiday season, get them something that they can use for calls or music, for work or play, at home or on the go. Or pick up a pair for yourself. Trust me, you're going to use them every day. Go to buyraycon.com/bescared today to unlock exclusive deals up to 20% off your Raycon order. But hurry, this offer is available for a limited time only and you don't want to miss it. That's buyraycon.com/bescared to unlock up to 20% off your Raycons. buyraycon.com/bescared. I was 8 years old when we first moved into the house on the edge of the forest. My parents had their doubts about buying a house with a backyard bordered by forest. They had concerns about wild animals getting into our bins and stuff, or hurting our dogs, and were worried one of us might go too far into the trees and get lost. But it was cheap. My dad liked the seclusion, my mum loved the house itself, and my siblings and I, we were excited about playing in the backyard and exploring the forest. I guess our first sign that something wasn't right was that our dogs were absolutely terrified of that forest. They never went into the forest for any reason. If a toy that they'd been playing with found its way past the tree line, they would refuse to retrieve it. And when one of us went in, they would pace anxiously until we returned. On occasion, we'd notice the dogs staring at a spot in the forest in obvious distress, sometimes growling or even barking, but we could never really see anything there. My brother once carried one of the dogs into the trees to show her that there was nothing scary about it, but she wriggled out of his grip and sprinted into the house in a panic. If we were in the backyard when it was getting dark, we would also sometimes hear noises like, I don't know, someone was walking through the forest maybe, sticks crunching underfoot, branches being pushed aside. If we called out there was no response, but if we shined a flashlight around, we would occasionally catch a glimpse for just a split second of something that we could swear looked like a person walking around in the dark. Upon hearing that, my parents quickly banned us from entering the forest at all after dark, and even during the day we weren't allowed to go out of sight of the house. My sister's bedroom window actually looked out at the backyard and the forest beyond, and she remembers looking out her window one night and seeing a shadowy figure standing right at the edge of the backyard. But she said that there was something wrong with it. Like, it wasn't quite standing on the ground, but it was a little too tall to be a person, and it was sort of distorted, she said. But she was convinced that it was staring straight at her. She called out for our dad, saying that there was a man in the yard staring through her window, and when he ran outside to chase off whoever it was, she continued to watch the figure. It didn't move away, but when the light from our dad's flashlight passed over it, it just suddenly wasn't there anymore, she said. We also regularly heard knocking at the back door at night, with no one there. My parents thought that it was teenagers playing pranks and stopped bothering even opening the door at one point. Until one rainy night when the knocking was so persistent, it agitated them. And my mum pointed out that there might be someone needing shelter from the heavy rain outside, but when she opened the door, not only was there nobody there, but there were no wet footprints on the porch either. The knocking continued the whole time that we lived there. It would happen several times in the span of like a few weeks, then stop for months, and then just randomly start up again. My parents even went as far as to install security cameras, but again, there was never anyone at the door. The camera wasn't all useless though. You see, about 3 years into living there, my brother started having night terrors and sleepwalking. When he went sleepwalking, he would always go out the back door and start walking towards the forest. My mum, being a light sleeper, would hear the door open and would run out to get him before he made it into the forest. After the third or fourth time it happened, my brother asked to see the camera footage because he wanted to see how he looked when sleepwalking. I guess thinking that it would look funny or something. But the footage showed him walking out onto the porch, then pausing as if listening to something, shaking his head, then reluctantly walking forward, as if being sort of pulled or forcefully guided by something. One evening, my dad was in the backyard, and he heard my sister calling him from the forest, seemingly in distress, thinking that she'd gone exploring in the forest and fallen over or hurt herself. He ran in and started calling to her, but quickly realized that it was way too dark to see her, and he couldn't pinpoint where her voice was coming from. He told her to wait where she was while he grabbed a flashlight, and when he ran back into the house for the flashlight, he saw my sister inside, safe and completely unconcerned. At the time, my dad hadn't told us about hearing my sister's voice in the forest, so when I heard my mum's voice coming from the forest months later while I was outside with the dogs one evening, I myself didn't question it, despite the fact that I'd seen my mum inside recently and hadn't noticed her walk past me. My mum was calling to me, saying that she'd gotten her sweater caught in some branches and needed me to come in and help her. As I walked in, though, the dog started barking, alerting my dad, who saw me through the window wandering into the forest. He quickly came outside and called to me, and I said that I was just helping Mum. But he yelled back that Mum was inside and I needed to run back to the house as fast as I could, which, upon hearing that, I did. It was after this, too, that my parents had a fence built around the backyard and started looking for a new place. In the time between the fence being built and us moving out, man, it got way worse. We'd hear knocking at the door more regularly, as well as tapping on the windows now, as if someone was walking around the perimeter of the house and trying every window. We would often hear scratching and scraping sounds on the fence, and voices beyond it. My brother's night terrors got way more frequent, and one night, my mum didn't hear the door open when he went sleepwalking, and he woke up standing at the fence, staring into the forest, with the dogs barking at him. The last morning we spent there, less than 4 years after we moved in, we woke up to find the back door fully open, and the security camera footage showed that it just slowly swung open on its own. Since moving out, my brother's sleepwalking has stopped, though he still gets night terrors and he suffers from pretty severe anxiety now. A few nights ago, he called me out of the blue, and after a bit of small talk, he asked me if I think the door being open that final night means whatever was out there finally got in. He was trying to make light of it, saying that he was getting into the spirit of Halloween, joking about how maybe we should all get exercised, just in case something latched onto us all those years ago. But I think that he's deeply bothered by everything that happened, to be honest. I know that I am a little bit still, and I still get nervous around dark wooded areas. I don't know what I think was out there in the forest behind our house at night, but I get the feeling, given the chance, it would have swallowed us whole. So I live in a rather old apartment complex that was built back when the suburb that I live in was more rural. Because of this, the complex property is rather large with a lot of green space between each building, and all the buildings in the complex are arranged to be facing a large open courtyard type area. There are quite a few lights on the front of each building, but not many on the sides of the buildings, so the green spaces between each building are fairly dark at night. Anyway, so I took my dog out rather late one evening to give him one last opportunity to go to the bathroom before we went to sleep. Because it was so late, I decided to just hang around the green space next to my building, instead of taking the dog for a proper walk around the courtyard area like I usually do. As I'm standing there while my dog heavily sniffs a patch of grass, I notice a guy dressed in all black walking on the opposite side of the courtyard. He sees me looking in his direction, and he turns into one of the green spaces next to a building on the opposite side. I can faintly see the outline of him, and I'm getting a little bit creeped out because he looks to be just sort of standing there in the darkness, doing nothing. After a few moments, I notice him light up a cigarette, and I try and chill out, telling myself that he likely just needed a smoke and is hiding out there to keep from being seen, since my complex has a non-smoking policy. I go back to walking my dog around the green space next to my building, trying to coax him into doing his business. Eventually he finds a suitable spot and assumes position. I look away from him and I notice the smoker has put his cigarette out and he's now walking in a straight line across the courtyard directly toward me, staring directly at me. I'm panicking now, kicking myself for not bringing anything to protect myself with, and for stupidly thinking, who's going to mess with a woman walking an 80-pound dog? The 80-pound dog is currently crouching to do his business, and I'm not confident that he would stop to protect me. Suddenly, though, Smoker Guy takes a hard right and walks into the green space on the other side of the building, to the right of my building. My dog finishes what he's doing, and I initially go to get a bag out to pick it up, but as I'm pretty freaked out and I don't know where Smoker Guy is, I say to myself, you know what, to heck with this, and run back to my apartment and lock the door. I go over to the window that faces the area that I was just in, and peek out, just in time to see the Smoker Guy come out of the darkness right behind where I was standing. He had gone through the green space and behind the neighboring building so that he could obviously come up behind me where I was standing. I stood motionless next to the window watching him as he stood there for a second, and then began looking around by the front of the buildings, I assume trying to see if I was still outside. Eventually he started walking back toward the courtyard, and I grabbed my phone and called the cops. I haven't seen him since then, but I am worried that he lives in one of the buildings in my complex. I don't take my dog out that late anymore and have started carrying pepper spray with me on our walks. Hopefully, I never need to use it, but better to be safe than sorry, right? So, this is going to take a while to explain everything, but stay with me because it all comes around eventually. So my very first car was a dark green 2000 Volkswagen Jetta. It was the most basic of basics when it came to cars. No options whatsoever except for like an automatic transmission. It was $300, slow, dumpy, no right headlight, drove straight with the steering wheel practically sideways, let out a cloud of white smoke when it started. Every stereotype of a poor high schooler's car that you can think of. My car, it was no exception. Despite it being just a piece of German excrement, I loved that car. I drove it every chance that I had. I don't think a day went by that I didn't drive it, in fact. I named it Thunder Bunny. She was my baby, my beautiful green baby. But Volkswagens from that generation, Jettas especially, had a pretty bad flaw in the automatic transmission. I'm not sure exactly what causes it, but essentially the transmissions gradually get worse and worse until the car will just not shift into third gear. And there's not really a thing that you can do from there too. So, a couple of weeks after Halloween in 2019, I was going about 30 miles per hour when the engine just suddenly roared and the car wouldn't speed up. I feared the worst, and my fears were justified too. But my dad, a mechanic, didn't even have hope for my baby. She was gone already at this point. And so, much to my dismay, we started looking for a new car. It only took about a month for us to find her, a dark green 1999 Volkswagen Jetta, exactly like my old car, but absolutely everything. She was faster, had heated leather seats, auto windows, auto sunroof, everything that you could think of. All except for an automatic transmission. Now, I knew how to drive manual, so it was pretty much perfect, and I had a new baby from crackhead neighbor girl. I loved that car even harder, named it Little Boy, and was so happy that I had another car again. So, I have a few more quick things to explain before I get to the main story, but it's important, not vital to the story, but still important. The first is for people that might not know, but when you have a manual car, you cannot leave it in gear and take your foot off the clutch. If you do, the car will stall, which is bad obviously. So, if you do leave your car in gear, you need to turn the engine off before taking your foot off the clutch. If you don't want to turn the car off or have it turn itself off, you need to pull the handbrake or it will roll away. And you can guess what the only really broken thing on my car was at the point that this story takes place. If you guessed handbrake, yep, you're right. Anyway, now that I have that out of the way, now to the story. So, I started working as a pizza delivery driver in a smaller growing town in Michigan. It was good money, but every once in a while I delivered to an incredibly sketchy place, and have even had a few shotguns pulled on me. But one night, about, I would say 2 months ago, I was delivering on a Friday. Usually Fridays are very busy, but this day I was a little bit slow. So when a delivery came in at like 8:30, half an hour before we closed, I jumped on it. I realized that it was 7.1 miles away, so all the closing jobs, they would be done by the time that I got back, and I would have been able to leave immediately. But it was way out of town in a sort of wooded surrounded neighborhood. But again, no work when I got back to the store, right? Seemed like a good deal to me. And I'm all about those sorts of deals. So I climbed into my car and went to drive the 7.1 miles away. As I pulled up to the house, I began to just get a really bad feeling, though. The house was a small trailer park type neighborhood next to a lake, the kind that the houses are all a good distance apart with a likely druggie problem, and it was completely dark. No lights inside, none outside, nothing. There was a single car in the driveway, though, and an open window on the side of the house. I pulled in behind the car in the driveway and just sort of sat there for a moment. I just couldn't shake this feeling that something was off about this place. Maybe it was the house being completely dark. I mean, there wasn't so much as a nightlight that I could see. Usually when I deliver to a dark house, there's at least a light on upstairs or something that would signal someone being awake, waiting for the pizza. But the house just seemed dead. Nevertheless, I put the car in gear, turned off the engine, grabbed the small, cheapest pizza that we had, and got out. Without my headlights on, there was nothing. I could barely see the house, in fact. The only light was the dim moon at this point. I walked onto the porch and past the big open window to the front door. As I reached the front door, though, I saw it. The door was slightly cracked open, just enough for me to see into the void of the house. Thinking of every single horror movie that I'd ever seen, I said aloud, "Stuff this," and I hurried back to my car. I'm a tall, well-built looking guy, but despite my wide shoulders and baggy hoodie, I'm a bit of a frail thing and can hardly fight off a small dog. So I got into my car and turned on my engine. My headlights illuminated the house, and Almost simultaneously, the living room light behind the big open window lit up, and a single guy looked out and walked to the front door. I cussed to myself and weighed my options. If I went up to the door, I could die, right? If I noped out of there, then I would 110% be fired. That meant no new car part, no gas money, no cute dates with my girl, just sitting at home doing virtual schoolwork. I know, it was a stupid choice, but I grabbed the pizza and opened my door, making a choice that I'm glad that I made. I took the car out of gear and climbed out. Mostly so my engine would still be running, so that if I needed to, I could run back and immediately take off. I walked to the door, where the man had opened it the rest of the way at this point. As I got closer, I also got a good look at him. Now, I'm not one to judge a person based on their physical appearance, but this guy's head was cleanly shaven and was covered in tattoos. He was wearing a pair of grey jeans and a white tank top. He had a scowl on his face that was staring me dead in the eyes. I looked past him for a moment into the house, which I then noticed was completely empty. As I got close enough that I started opening the pizza bag, he started to reach around his waist and I stopped. He was staring at me too with the most evil grin that I'd ever seen. And I knew in that moment that I was about to die. I had always heard your life seems to flash before your eyes. I thought about my girl, that she wouldn't know what happened. My work would stop delivering upon my disappearance, assuming that my body wasn't ever found. My dad would regret telling me that he was happy for me landing this job. But man, someone was looking out for me that night, because that was when I heard it. That distinct sound of gravel under tires. And I watched as my only pathetically small chance of escape was now rolling away. I didn't even look back at the car to know that. I just stared at the man and was about to say, "Man, screw this," when he looked back to my car and I heard the sound of the car rolling, and it was getting closer. The guy's eyes went from the driveway to behind me, and I finally looked over my shoulder, and my car had rolled backwards and had come to a smooth stop near the mailbox of the house. I looked back at the guy, who had a really nervous look now. He looked back at me and scowled again and took his hand from his waist. He reached into his front pocket and took out $12 and handed it to me. I gave him the pizza and watched him slam the door shut, and at that, I ran back to my car and practically tore the door off trying to get in. I looked back at the house, and the man was standing in the front window just staring out at me. You better believe, though, that I nearly spun the tires on my way out of there. I kept glancing at my mirrors until I started driving under streetlights, and it was easily the scariest moment that I've ever had. As soon as I got back to the store, I told my boss about it, and she called the police. We never did hear anything about it. I assumed that they went to the house, but probably only found a small cheese pizza. After this, though, I started carrying a knife on me at all times, and my boss is considering getting trackers for our pizza bags too. But you know what? It's only recently that I realized that this is sort of a bit of a butterfly effect story. What I mean is that I thought it was the worst thing ever that my transmission went out, and I cursed my Volkswagen for designing such a terrible automatic transmission. But if that transmission was still working, then I would have still had that car when this happened. I would have put the car in park and it would have sat there while whatever would have happened, happened. I have zero doubts too in my mind that this man was planning on murdering me or something, and all I can say is, I thank God for terrible handbrakes.